called for urgent reform of the UN Security Council, now criticizing its outdated structure and called for representation for Africa, which he argued undermines the body's credibility and global legitimacy. He asserts that it is unacceptable for the primary peace and security entity globally not to have a permanent representation for a continent with over 8 billion inhabitants. Simply, it is unacceptable, he said. Now, let's have more details of that in this report by Sasum Cham.
Many of the African countries were once under colonial rule and lacked a voice in global matters, as the current setup of the UN Security Council and its 15 members possess significant challenges, while only 5 hold permanent veto power, like China, France, Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom. The remaining 10 seats are non-permanent. Surprisingly, only 3 of these seats are allocated to African states, this prompting the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres to highlight the urgent need for reform, advocating strongly for a permanent seat for Africa on the UN Security Council. Meanwhile, the General Assembly President Denis Francis, in his high-level address, strongly criticized the ongoing underrepresentation of Africa on the Security Council, labeling it as a fundamental unjust and contradictory to the principles of fairness and diversity.
The fact that Africa continues to be manifestly underrepresented on the Security Council is simply wrong, offending as it does both the principles of equity and inclusion. It runs counter to the principle of sovereign equality of states and calls for urgency to reform this institution to reflect the world as it is now, rather than what it was nearly 80 years ago.
According to the General Assembly President Denis Francis, the situation of the UN Security Council not positioning Africa's seat at the high table has failed to keep pace with a changing world and contradicts the principle of sovereign equality of states, and urged immediate reform of the institution to align with the present global reality, rather than its states almost 8 years ago, addressing historical injustice. Enhancing Africa's representation in the Security Council occurred during Sierra Leone's Council presidency. 25 African News.